and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. I'm an admiral now. I promoted myself. So, way back in 2010, before I even reached 100 episodes, I reviewed a crossover comic, Star Trek / X-Men #1. It was a bizarre little pairing of franchises that had absolutely nothing to do with each other. It did have some interesting ideas and a rather amusing moment or two, but overall, the artistic styles of the two did not blend well, the storytelling was rather haphazard, and the plot itself bizarre, anticlimactic, and dumb. And of course, people were quick to inform me that it was not the only crossover piece the two franchises did together. Hence where we are today, Star Trek The Next Generation / X-Men #1, which is actually the lead-in to an entire novel where the two franchises crossed over. I'm still in shock that this concept was approved in the first place, so you can imagine my utter confusion that this actually made a second comic and a crossover novel. I will not be reading the novel due to a lack of time, and frankly the comic should stand or fall on its own. The good news, if you can call it that, is that it's 64 pages, which means that they should have a lot more room to make a decent story. We'll forget for a second that it's not actually 64 pages, but rather 59, since it's 59 pages of comic, 3 pages of the editor talking about the problems they had in creating this thing, and then 2 pieces of badly drawn promotional artwork. Speaking of, the comic creation actually went very smoothly once they actually had a creative team in place, but the problem was getting a creative team in place. The editor, Tim Tuohy, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, was charged with making the book in April of 1997 and was told that they wanted it out in July of that year. Only 3 months away. For the record, usually professional comics are completed and in the can several months in advance. It doesn't always work out that way, as we've talked about in the show, but usually they strive for having things done ahead of time. 3 months really isn't a lot of time to put things together, especially when you don't even have a story concept or a creative team lined up and ready to work on it. The editor actually had to explain that to then Editor-in-Chief Bob Harris and get a much more reasonable deadline. On top of that, you need to get the approval of both the X-Men offices and Paramount for it. Fact number 3. Editors can't write the books they edit. Based on what I've seen, that doesn't seem to stop them. Plus, most of their best writers were busy doing other stuff or were overwhelmed by how to do the project, seemingly because of how big both franchises were that they loved, though I prefer to think that they just couldn't figure out how to make it plausible. And apparently, no one actually thought to ask the actual Star Trek comic writers until the very last if they were up to it, which they were. Also, when you're apparently utilizing the likenesses of the actors, you need the actors' permission to use said likenesses. And frankly, in a lot of this comic, I think they only do a passable job at it, but whatever. So let's dig into Star Trek The Next Generation / X-Men #1 and see what sort of mess they came up with.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara, coins, robots, Amazon and trucks. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
The cover is decent, with the painted look of the wraparound looking pretty neat, although I say that mostly about the Star Trek cast, who all actually look like their real-life counterparts. The X-Men are not as fortunate, particularly the women. Storm and I think Shadowcat have it worst. It's hard to pin down what it is, but it just doesn't look right. It might just be me, since I have a general idea of what I think these characters should look like, and putting them next to the Star Trek actors makes them look off. Wolverine looks okay though, albeit like the original crossover, seeing the over-muscled superhero look next to the more realistic people is just bizarre. And of course, this is all for nothing anyway, considering this art style isn't the one used in the comic. In all honesty, I really shouldn't be reviewing this for a while. See, in terms of Star Trek continuity, this is supposed to take place right after the events of the 8th movie, Star Trek First Contact, which we of course haven't reached yet in our look at Star Trek movie comics. However, after getting my hands on a copy of this thing, I just really wanted to review it, and well, here we are. Here's all the basics you need to know. Star Trek First Contact involved the crew time traveling and the Borg. This takes place right after the events of that, which explains why we open up with half of Data's face missing. Or maybe he was just practicing his Frankenstein meets the space monster cosplay. The ship is attempting to return to the 24th century, but as they drop out of warp, they detect none of the usual orbiting facilities, and passive scans of the Earth show that it's not the 24th century. Borg damage to the main deflector dish may have caused a reverse warp in the temporal vortex, propelling us back instead of forwards.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
We are currently orbiting Earth circa late 1990s.
Damn, we'll need to dress inconspicuously. Number 1, I need Pokemon plushies and Beanie Babies.
Way ahead of you, sir.
Here we go again. Number 1!
Sorry, sir. Geez, humanity almost gets destroyed and you break your little ships in a fit of inarticulate rage, and suddenly you're in a bad mood, Picard. Later, they hold a briefing.
What's our status? We've engaged stealth mode. The ship's invisible to electronic detection.
Because I guess we have that now. Basically, technobabble blah 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 from the movie has screwed everything up, and they need certain technology to fix it. Sensor scans indicate that, despite this being the late 20th century, there's Shi'ar technology on Earth. The Shi'ar, if you will recall, are an alien bird race from the Marvel Universe who usually hang out with the X-Men, and that subsequently Kirk and company didn't recognize in the other crossover. Weird. Speaking of weird, is it just me, or is Riker's face absolutely tiny compared to the rest of his head? Picard orders 2 teams to Earth to acquire it, which includes Data and Worf, the 2 guys who look the least like normal humans. But I guess we couldn't afford the budget for extras, and thus they're recruited. Also, Troy, what's going on with your face? The shading and highlighting seem to indicate that it's actually some kind of paper facsimile folded in place to look like a face. Riker, Dr. Crusher, and Worf beam down in appropriate clothing with a cap to cover Worf's forehead ridges, because that totally will fool people.
These jeans are a most uncomfortable garment.
Darn right. Why do you think I wear pajama pants all the time? According to their tricorder, the Shi'ar technology they're looking for is inside of the Baxter Building, which at the time this comic was made, was being occupied by a group of supervillains pretending to be heroes called the Thunderbolts. Where's the Fantastic Four, you may ask? Why, they were in the middle of an event called Heroes Reborn, where everyone thought they and the Avengers were dead. No, they had a fate worse than death. Being written and drawn by Rob Liefeld. And cue comments from people telling me that only the Avengers and Captain America were helmed by Rob Liefeld, thus ruining my joke in 5, 4, 3. Worf also points out that in the Star Trek universe, the world should be in the midst of the eugenics war right now, so this all looks a little weird. Of course, we can look to non-canon material for an explanation there. A series of novels by Greg Cox called The Rise and Fall of Khan Noonien Singh, which said that a lot of the eugenics wars were actually done in secret, with their full implications not realized until later, and tied in a lot of real-life events into them while altering their true cause. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, when the Enterprise is informed of this, Picard recalls that away team and waits for word from the other team, which is currently sneaking into the X-Men mansion. Said X-Men are sitting around just chillaxing and talking. Geordi, Troy, and Data make their way downstairs, and Troy appears to get a headache and whispers, "Oh, something." Ah, Nothing like Counselor Troy to give us the most useful information while looking like she's in an Advil commercial. Geordi takes off a panel to examine the technology when Wolverine suddenly arrives and puts his bone claws in front of and behind his head. And once more time to treat Wolverine like he was nothing by having Data grab him and toss him aside. I am amused by this. Colossus suddenly appears from nowhere, and I didn't know this, but apparently the metal covering him also turns him into a giant according to this panel. Colossus tries punching Data, who does manage to catch the fist, but the force propels him backwards. Troy tells them all to knock it off and states that they're from the Enterprise, which gets Wolverine's attention.
Enterprise? Starship Enterprise? Are you some of Kirk's people? Because if you're some of Captain Archer's people, the claws come back out!
And so we cut to some time later, where the Enterprise crew and the X-Men have switched back into their uniforms with the two teams meeting up in the X-Mansion. I love how they apparently took the time to do that before meeting each other formally. I've also got to wonder who the hell is running the ship in their absence, but that's a general problem with Star Trek when the entire bridge crew is on an away mission. Oh, and there are a few other oddities that make me tilt my head concerning the uniforms thing. For example, there's a cut in Worf's uniform from something that happened in First Contact. Except Worf is a pretty by-the-book kind of officer, and there's been plenty of time to switch clothes, so why the hell hasn't he replicated some new pants? Or had another pair waiting? And then over to Picard, there's a big red line along the front of his torso. Why is that line there? Well, so that the shading on Colossus's leg doesn't blend into the uniform and make us think that Picard has a pointy stomach. My question is, why did that have to be completely black instead of a darker skin tone? Oh, and I'm afraid those of you hoping that Picard and Professor Xavier would interact with each other in one of the most meta crossover moments ever, that's not gonna happen. See, the cause of the whole Heroes Reborn thing, it was Xavier going nuts and housing an entity that was the combined form of him and Magneto called Onslaught, and in the wake of all that, he was in prison or something. I do hope someday for us to have dueling Patrick Stewarts in one way or another. Epic rap battles of history, I'm giving you an easy one here. Anyway, Riker explains the situation, and using their technobabble X-Men tech, they realize that they've been flung into an alternate universe.
Parallel dimensions. I despise them. They are no end of trouble.
Tell me about it, bub. Worf and Wolverine, ultimate bromance. Troy and Wolverine sense something arriving, thus heralding the appearance of Kang the Conqueror. Kang is a time-traveling Marvel supervillain from the 30th century, utilizing various kinds of advanced technology to achieve his goals, and wearing an advanced suit and sometimes wielding mind control tech, and attempting to take over the world whenever it's convenient for him. They demand to know what he wants, and he explains that he came to warn them that the arrival of the Enterprise has ruptured the blah-blah-blah technobabble,
creating anomalies in both your world's continuities.
Continuity errors? We'll need some kind of nitpicking guide to point them out. As always, I am prepared. And he also says that if they don't correct this, the destabilization will cause the multimodal reflection sorting to be unsorted and everything will be destroyed. Also, he's really friggin' huge in this panel. I admit I'm not familiar enough with Kang as a character and his various appearances, but is it normal for him to be like 10 feet tall? Even floating in the air, he looks really big.
I'm huge!
He informs them that 2 specific anomalies have to be sealed to restore everything, and supplies them with wristbands that will take them where they need to go.
I am losing our link! I must go! Help me, Storm, for the good of all life, everywhere!
And because the artwork on this page is rather lackluster, we don't actually see him teleport away. Not even a little energy field around him or anything. Wouldn't it just be awkward if he wasn't actually being pulled away and he just floated there for a few minutes in silence? The X-Men return with the bridge crew to the Enterprise and split into 2 teams of 4, since Kang only supplied them with 8 wristbands. Picard, Troy, Nightcrawler, and Colossus will go to one, and Storm, Wolverine, Data, and Worf will go to another. Picard's team is beamed away via the wristbands, and they arrive in the storyline Days of Future Past. For those of you who don't know, Days of Future Past is a classic X-Men storyline from 1981. Basically, in the far-off future year of 2013, mutants are enslaved and Sentinel robots have taken over the world. It's almost July now. Those Sentinels better get going. They've got less than half a year left to take us over. Hello! I'm the Doctor, and we'll be right back! Oh dear. Oh, we're back! A bunch of cannibalistic hooligans suddenly show up and attack our heroes, but are easily repelled thanks to the power of phasers and just punching them. However, they've got bigger trouble thanks to the arrival of 3 Sentinels. Meanwhile, the other team has found themselves on board the USS Saratoga during the Battle of Wolf 359. In case you're not a Star Trek fan, that's the big battle where the Borg basically annihilated 40 starships without breaking a sweat, and was the event that opened Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which explains one of those continuity errors that Kang was talking about. In the original Next Generation episode with the battle, Data said that there were no signs of life, meaning no survivors of the battle. But in the opening of DS9, yeah, there were a lot of survivors. Whoops. Also, yes, I am a gigantic nerd. Is this your first time watching? Speaking of things that don't make sense, a group of Borg are on board the Saratoga. I could get into other nerdy things about this, tying it into the FMV game Star Trek Borg and how the battle was depicted there, but let's just point out that the time it takes for the Saratoga to be destroyed at the beginning of DS9 was all of 4 minutes, even if you do give or take a few minutes for the editing to not show every step. Just saying, the Borg apparently just beamed a whole bunch of drones on board the Saratoga for pretty much no reason whatsoever. Although this does lead to the amusement of having Wolverine slice off a drone's arm and Storm being able to create a tornado inside of the deck that rips apart a few more. Assimilate that. Data even points out the continuity flaw of there not being any record of the Borg beaming over to any Federation vessels. Okay, I need to be a nerd here. The Deep Space Nine video game for the Sega Genesis actually does have a level where you go back in time and there are Borg on board the Saratoga. No joke or anything, this is just what happens when you have someone with an encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek crap at your disposal. And by the way, that level where you have to disarm the bombs in the cargo bay was complete and utter bullcrap. I do not regret using the level select code to skip past it. The drones begin speaking, despite absolutely no reason to do so, and Storm deduces that they're on the ship because of the mutants, that the Borg detected the strange life signs and decided to take them for assimilation. We'll forgive that for efficiency's sake they wouldn't be wasting time worrying about curious life forms and just proceed with what they were trying to do, but whatever. Back with the other group, Picard just barely manages to evade getting hit by a Sentinel's blast. It then detects Troy as being unusual since she's not human. Well, technically she's half human, but whatever. But before it can collect her, Picard shoots a phaser blast through its head. No one vivisects my crew members. Other crews, though, yeah, go nuts. Nightcrawler and Colossus take out the remaining Sentinels, and they decide to make a run for it before any more show up, but Troy says she's sensing something else related to all of this that's bigger than they imagined. As such, we cut to Kang's time ship inside the deep waters of time, as opposed to the kiddie pool of time, I guess. Kang monologues to himself, seriously, he's loudly explaining his plan to nobody, about what's actually going on. The damage to the continuum caused by the Starship Enterprise was indeed severe, but they have not the wit to realize that the anomalies I have sent them chasing after are in fact the last few slender threads holding things together. Once they have rectified them, all my impediments to my manipulation to the time stream will be gone, and infinity will be mine to shape like clay. Also, for some reason, I'm sitting in a fancy chair suspended over nothing. What the hell? Seriously, look at that. It's not even like some high-tech chair. Dude got a chair from a furniture barn and just has it floating inside of his ship. Thing must be really damn comfortable. I'm jealous. Back on the Enterprise, they detect another temporal incursion, heralding the arrival of... oh, sweet merciful crap. Wesley Crusher and the Traveler. Oh, dear Lord. Time for backstory! For those of you not familiar with Star Trek The Next Generation, Wesley Crusher was the annoying know-it-all, super awesome teenage genius on the show whose presence helped resolve situations in no less than 7 times on the series. He's the kid who got drunk on a space virus and took over the ship once, and of course he was insufferable. Fortunately, in other seasons, he actually became tolerable and a likable character. It's just that, like with a lot of Season 1 and 2 of Next Generation, he was irritating. And of course, I should point out that he was played by the ever-awesome God Among Geeks Will Wheaton. The guy he's with is a time-traveling alien called the Traveler, who, unlike Judas Traveler in the Spider-Man Clone Saga, was actually pretty nifty as a mysterious being with ambiguous powers and abilities, and appeared several times in The Next Generation, eventually leaving with Wesley in the 7th season to explore the wonders of existence. My problem with Wesley's inclusion here is less his presence in and of itself, but more that he's yet again a solution to a problem. Plus, he comes just right the hell out of nowhere. The concept of Star Trek and the X-Men crossing over was a fanfic kind of event to begin with, so throwing in stuff like Days of Future Past, Wolf 359, Wesley and the Traveler, it feels very much like a wouldn't it be cool if kind of thing, with little regard for story structure or general character interaction, throwing in as many references as possible. Wesley and the Traveler are here, but only to move the plot along, not for any real character stuff. Let me contrast this with another crossover. People have been asking me if I plan to review the Star Trek The Next Generation and Doctor Who crossover comic that ended last February. The answer is no, because that comic is good. It features the 2 sets of characters interacting a lot more and having character-based discussions with each other, and it feels like they're in character. Mind you, it helps that the story is 8 issues and therefore has room to breathe, whereas this is a 59-page one-shot, but that's basically equivalent to 2.5 issues that you could have done something more in line with character than that. Maybe the character dynamics happen more with the novel, but this just isn't working. It's mostly action and plot exposition. Speaking of plot exposition, Wesley explains that when the Enterprise cut between realities, it allowed interchanges of history and people, but that these aren't mistakes. It's actually the way the time stream is resolving the problem, and that trying to fix it is actually making things worse, which will allow Kang to take control of the time stream. Although, hey, if Kang really can take over the time stream, we've already got X-Men and Star Trek on board. I say let's do that Doctor Who crossover early and get the Doctor in here to fix this. The Traveler can bring the Enterprise to Kang's ship so they can confront him, while Wesley and Shadowcat head out to warn the 2 teams. Back on the Saratoga, we have a quick cameo by Ben Sisko from Deep Space Nine, and the team is about to intervene when they spot someone who they think should be from the other universe. Wesley and Shadowcat arrive and stop them before they can interfere. The guy who was from the Marvel Universe, Proudstar, dies saving Sisko from an explosion, I guess, and Data explains that Sisko is meant to become the emissary of the Prophets over on DS9, thus Kang was hoping to stop the Prophets as a potential threat since they have powers over time, and oh dear God, is this convoluted. Wesley and Shadowcat leave to warn the other team, telling them to use the wristbands to return home. The ones that Kang gave them? The ones you probably can't trust now? Kang somehow watching this. It's not like he's watching from the wristband, or is Wolverine holding out his arm awkwardly to view them like in this panel? Is pissed off and smashes the monitor with his hand. I would just love it if a villain who did that kind of thing suddenly pulled their hand back, screaming in pain from the broken shards now embedded in their fist. Kang is wondering who the hell Wesley is and how he can move through space and time so effortlessly, but is interrupted by the arrival of the Enterprise, which opens fire on Kang's ship. Unfortunately, Kang's ship has been upgraded with technology from across time and is more than a match for them. The Traveler volunteers to take a force over to his ship and try to take him down, while we cut over to Team 2 and its fan service moment. This time with the late Tasha Yar helping out the adult Shadowcat during the Days of Future Past stuff. Wesley and Tasha arrive, but before they can explain anything, more Sentinels show up. These ones appear to have people inside their heads. Don't know what the hell is up with that. Tasha is knocked out and the group has to fight off the Sentinels. In her delirium, Tasha begs them to help them with boosting a psychic signal. It's a complicated story thing involving the adult Shadowcat sending her mind into the younger version. It all makes more sense in the original Days of Future Past story, I'm sure. Point is, Troy thinks she can use her empathic abilities to boost the signal and save the day, which they do so. The team departs and we cut over to Kang's ship, where Riker and Banshee are fighting off... Wait a second. Those robo-bugs. Those look like the robo-bugs from Sci-Spy! So it's Kang's fault that I had to review that piece of crap last week? Kick his ass, guys! The Traveler, I think, does something to Kang's ship to screw him up and then beams them back over to the Enterprise. Captain, close study of Kang's systems showed me that he is using a temporal resonator to amplify the damage caused by the Enterprise's misjump. He's still out to dominate the continuum. I've no stomach for his schemes. I do have a kidney and a liver for them, though. Seriously, that was the best line you could give to Picard for his action one-liner. You might as well have said he's very cross. Another blast of phasers and torpedoes takes out the time device thingy that Kang was using, and his ship implodes. In a captain's log, Picard explains that the rift between the universes is starting to return to normal, and everyone says their goodbyes to each other, leaving us with the only really amusing bit of this whole thing. Worf holding a cigar and asking in confusion, "Stogie?" Our heroes say farewell.
Man, was that a weird episode.
And so our comic ends with the X-Men back on Earth, but then the group sees a bright white light and we're told that it's to be continued in the Planet X novel. This comic is not very good. I hesitate to say that it sucks. It's ambitious, I'll give it that, and the action is really enjoyable, if a bit poorly drawn. The pencils feel rushed, and oftentimes backgrounds or little details are left out when they shouldn't be. If I can give this comic any particular praise, though, it's for the pacing. It's actually a really breezy read. It never feels bogged down or going too fast. And while it's still essentially a bad fanfic, it's not one that's unbearable. Now if we can just get that Star Trek and Star Wars crossover at some point, we'll finally have a completed list of unnecessary but awesome crossovers between Star Trek and other franchises. Stogie?